So we're very lucky today to have the whole research team with us that conducted this project, and I'd like to introduce them. Firstly, we have John Guenther, who is the Research Leader, Education and Training at Batchelor Institute. His research and evaluation work over the last 20 years has focused on education and related social issues in remote parts of the NT and Western Australia. His work informs First Nations social policy and practice by building an evidence base that promotes local community voices. We've also got Dr. Robyn Ober with us. She is a Marmu durable woman from far north Queensland. She's an Indigenous research practice leader and educator at Batchelor Institute as well, and she has extensive experience in the Northern Territory that spans 3 decades. She has expertise in both ways pedagogy, working to combine Indigenous and non-Indigenous ways of knowing, being and learning in teaching, practice and research. We also have with us today Sam Osborne. He's the Associate Director of Regional Engagement at Adelaide University. He's worked in Aboriginal education since 1995, including in school leadership programs and a range of roles, including corporation interpreting, consulting, research and evaluation. Sam's current research focus includes culturally responsive pedagogies, Aboriginal languages and remote Aboriginal education. And the final member of our research team is Dr. Abigail Diplock. She's a postdoctoral research fellow also at Adelaide University, and her work explores how teachers and schools in Australia engage with the cultural, political and ethical complexities of education. And she's contributed to projects on culturally responsive schooling and teacher action research. So I'd like to welcome the research team. Before we get going, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of country throughout Australia and their continued spiritual connection to land and water. We're presenting from a number of different places today. Abigail, Sam and I are presenting from the lands of the Kaurna people, the Adelaide Plains. John is presenting from Wurundjeri country in Naarm, in Melbourne. Robyn is presenting from the lands of the Larrakia Nation in Darwin. And Elise, who's working in the back end, keeping this webinar going, is joining us from the Guenther people in Sydney. And of course, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which all the attendees are joining us today. And we pay respects to elders past and present, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. So let's get into the content. Before I hand over to the research team, I'd like to set the scene a little bit. Today we're presenting the findings of this recently published research, which is available from the NCVER portal. This research was funded by the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, and it was funded through NCVER's National SON Research Program. So what was the policy context for this work? We know that vocational education and training is an important education and employment pathway for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia, and it therefore plays a really important role in the Australian government's Closing the Gap initiative, which aims to address the gaps between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal education, health and employment outcomes. But the research and the national data that reports on the participation outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people reveal persistent gaps, particularly in the various measures of achievement. So this brings us to the question of what registered training organisations can do to promote successful outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, whether those outcomes include training completion and transition to employment or some other outcomes viewed as desirable by the learner and their community. And we talk about these other outcomes because we know that although completion rates tend to be low for Aboriginal learners, participation can be just as important for job outcomes and other beneficial outcomes that are enabled through the relationships, the cultural and identity affirmation and transfer of Indigenous knowledge that can occur through VET. So, how can RTOs facilitate successful outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander learners? However we define that success, what are the known strategies? Well, there are two main strategies that have been used to approach this. The first is by creating environments that are more responsive to the cultural needs and contexts of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So here we talk about culturally responsive training. The second strategy is by considering a place-based model of training, a model that has been identified as useful in addressing local socio-economic issues, including for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So place-based training for Aboriginal people might be effective as it might be more likely to be attuned to the ways in which Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people connect and identify with place and country. So the overarching project aim was to investigate how place-based and culturally responsive training can be integrated into VET more effectively and potentially more broadly, thereby leading to more meaningful outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. The project took a qualitative case study approach. It was carried out in collaboration with 3 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander training organisations, and I'll leave it to the research team to introduce those organisations. The research team conducted these case studies through interviews and having yarns with learners, staff, which included trainers and management, and other stakeholders in the community, and in particular industry stakeholders or industry representatives and employers. The case studies were shaped by a series of research questions, and I've sort of truncated them in this slide to save us from a very wordy slide. But basically, we were interested in what does a place-based approach mean in the context of vocational education and training for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander learners, and how is it defined? How do place-based approaches support successful outcomes, including completions and transition to meaningful employment, and also the broader benefits of learners and communities? How does community location and remoteness impact on place-based practices? What does good practice in culturally responsive VET look like? And how does this good practice illustrate place-based approaches? And what are the common challenges that are encountered in establishing best practice models of culturally responsive and place-based VET, and how can they be addressed? And lastly, what can be learned, particularly through partnerships, that can be applied to providers in urban areas and vice versa? So I'd love to hand over to the research team now to go through the findings and some detail around the case studies.
Hi, thanks for having us here. Okay, so I looked at and had a chance to chat with the staff and students and stakeholders at Tundi Aboriginal College. This is a college that's an Aboriginal community controlled training organisation that was established in 1973, and it's located in the north of the city of Adelaide. It's in Port Adelaide. The college teaches foundational skills and career-focused short courses. It also offers Aboriginal languages, including Ghana and Ngarrindjeri, with pathways to becoming community educators, language teachers, vocational trainers, and other careers. And it runs some fee-for-service short courses as well. Being an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation and having been established for over 50 years now, there are undoubtedly things about Tondi that are pretty special. For a start, Aboriginal people are in the majority, and this is huge for creating a sense of cultural safety and trust. As one staff member said, it's a safe space because there are people who understand with lived experience. And as one student put it, you can be in a culturally safe environment, no shame, no nothing. They also noted how this offers powerful role models. However, while this represents a best practice, staff also talked about the importance of their non-Aboriginal colleagues sharing this responsibility and being culturally conscious and responsive as well. The other special thing about Tondi that staff, students and industry partners all consistently spoke of is its 53-year history and the trust that this long-standing relationship with the Port Adelaide community brings. This longevity means that Tondi is widely recognised as a safe and trusted space and as a, quote, haven for Aboriginal people. So we go to the next slide because, importantly, they don't just sit back and rest on their reputation. They actively work to keep this strong and evolving. For example, staff and students attend local cultural events such as Reconciliation Week and the NAIDOC March, using these opportunities to be visible, to listen and contribute to community conversations. Trainers described these moments as vital for sharing stories. Tondi also hosts events and open days, which invite the wider community onto campus. These occasions also offer real-world learning experiences for students, such as managing stores and budgets. There are also many visual cues on the campus, such as artworks, artifacts, posters, etc. And staff and students described how the use of Aboriginal design elements are seen as much more than decorations. They make visible Tondi's identity as an Aboriginal learning space and affirm that cultural presence. And the grounds include native gardens and a fire pit, and trainers describe these outdoor spaces as offering a recharge and a place to connect to country. Language is used where appropriate, with trainers adapting or drawing on Ghana where possible, and asking students and community whether resources are respectful and might work on the ground. Staff also highlighted the importance of recognising the diversity of Aboriginal languages, nations and experiences. Challenging stereotypes and low expectations. So cultural responsiveness was described as both a political and pedagogical commitment, one that needs to challenge stereotypes, and trainers deliberately set high expectations and work to counter deficit assumptions. They offer individualized support. So trainers invest the time getting to know each student's circumstances, aspirations and challenges before formal learning begins. So support extends beyond coursework to include help with practical issues such as ID certification, transport, housing, counselling, some of which includes connecting students to external organisations. So just sort of drawing the students' comments together, they describe things about gaining self-esteem, rediscovering pride and identity, as well as building literacy and numeracy skills. So as one student put it, it just feels like you leave home, then you're coming to another place that feels like home. And that's what's really important.
Thanks, Abigail. That's great. We're going to move on to the next case study, which I think is Sam.